From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Well, we're seeing the rising food prices affect virtually every market in the world. The difference is, for the richer countries, there's more resiliency. We can give up desserts. We can give up meat once or twice a week. For people making less than $1 a day, there's nowhere to retreat.
The global food crisis threatens to plunge more than 100 million people on every continent into hunger and poverty. Haiti is one of the hardest hit. Then, over 3,000 delegates are attending the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. We'll speak with Bolivian President Evo Morales on world hunger, biofuels, and the U.S. presidential elections.
I very much respect that there are democratic elections and primary elections within each party, Democratic and Republican. I fully respect that. And similarly, I would hope that they not meddle in Bolivia.
And Up the Yangtze, a critically acclaimed new documentary, takes on the social impact of the Three Gorges Dam in China. We'll talk with the Chinese-Canadian filmmaker Young Chang. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. On the campaign trail, Democratic candidates Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama have turned their focus to Indiana following Clinton's win in the Pennsylvania primary. The Clinton campaign says it raised $10 million in online donations following her victory. On Wednesday, Clinton insisted her string of big state primary wins proves she's more electable.
Absolutely. You know, more people have now voted for me than have voted for my opponent. In fact, I now have more votes than anybody's ever had in a primary contest for a nomination. And it's also clear that we've got 9 more important contests to go.
Clinton was including her victory in both the Michigan and Florida primaries as part of her calculation, but neither primary will count because of a breach of Democratic Party rules. None of the candidates campaigned in Florida, while Senator Barack Obama and John Edwards stayed off the ballot in Michigan. On Capitol Hill, Senate Republicans have blocked a bill that would have overturned a Supreme Court ruling limiting pay discrimination lawsuits. The Senate fell 4 votes short of considering the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, named for a female employee of the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, who was paid 40% less than her male colleagues doing the same job. Ledbetter lost her suit against Goodyear after the court ruled she did not file a complaint in time. Republican presidential candidate John McCain joined 41 other Republicans in voting against the measure. Meanwhile, the House has voted to stop the Bush administration from cutting $13 billion in Medicaid health care spending over the next 5 years. The 349-62 vote would override a threatened veto from President Bush if the Senate follows suit. The Bush administration plans to promote 2 military commanders who've led the U.S. occupation of Iraq. General David Petraeus would be promoted from U.S. commander in Iraq to head all U.S. military operations in the Middle East. Petraeus would be replaced by Lieutenant General Raymond Odierno. His former deputy, Admiral William Fallon, resigned as the top U.S. commander in the Middle East in March over his apparent differences with the Bush administration on threatening Iran and boosting troop levels in Iraq. The UN is warning it could be forced to suspend humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip today because of the Israeli blockade. The United Nations Works and Relief Agency is responsible for feeding nearly 2/3 of Gaza's 1.4 million people. Agency officials say they expect trucks to run out of fuel this afternoon. Israel's intensified military attacks and economic isolation of the Gaza Strip since Hamas took control last June. Hamas, meanwhile, says it's awaiting an Israeli response to its latest offer of a ceasefire in the occupied territories. Meanwhile, the Israeli government is claiming the Bush administration has secretly endorsed its long-standing policy of expanding West Bank settlements it ultimately intends to keep. This week, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert said President Bush agreed to let Israel expand settlements, even though his so-called peace plan officially calls for a freeze. Ariel Sharon's former chief of staff, Dov Weissglass, also said Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice secretly reaffirmed White House approval of West Bank settlement expansion in the spring of 2005, right before Israel dismantled its settlements in the Gaza Strip. Israel's so-called withdrawal from Gaza was widely seen as an attempt to solidify its hold over the West Bank. U.S. officials are denying Weissglass's account of a secret agreement. The news comes as Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Washington today meets with Bush administration officials. Abbas has criticized the U.S. for not blocking Israeli settlement activity despite the resumption of peace talks. Meanwhile, the Syrian government is claiming Israel has offered to return the Golan Heights in return for a full peace deal. A Syrian cabinet minister said Israel had relayed the offer through Turkey. Israel occupied the Golan Heights during the 1967 war. The slain Palestinian journalist Fadel Shana was remembered Wednesday at a ceremony in the Gaza Strip. Shana was working as a cameraman for Reuters when an Israeli tank attacked his vehicle earlier this month. His final piece of footage shows the tank firing a shell just before the camera went blank. Other journalists who arrived at the scene also said they came under tank fire. On Wednesday, Reuters bureau chief Alistair MacDonald paid tribute to Shana's memory.
He was surrounded here in Gaza by much suffering, and chose to turn his eye on a daily basis on sights that few of us could bear to see in a lifetime. And yet, Fadel's gentle focus on all that was beautiful in the world is among our strongest memories of him.
5 Palestinian civilians were also killed in the attack that took Shana's life. Leaders from Venezuela, Bolivia, Cuba, and Nicaragua have announced a joint program to fight rising food costs in Latin America. Meeting in Caracas, the Bolivian Alternative for the Americas, or ALBA, says it will create a $100 million food security fund. Cuban Vice President Carlos Lage said the food crisis underscores the need for radical change.
Las naciones desarrolladas se proponen destinar cada vez.
The developed nations propose to destine each time more food for the production of energy. The developed society intends to feed the automobiles of the rich, of the wealthy society, with food.
Las sociedades desarrolladas pretenden alimentar los automóviles de los ricos.
It is an irrational world in which we live in today. This is the world that we have to transform and that we are going to transform.
The declaration came hours after the World Food Program declared the global food crisis a silent tsunami that threatens to plunge more than 100 million people on every continent into hunger and poverty. The rise in food prices is seeing new consequences back in the United States. On Wednesday, the 2 largest U.S. warehouse chains said they would ration sales of rice because of dwindling supplies. Sam's Club and Costco say the rationing will apply to bulk sales, not retail sales. A new survey shows 60% of Environmental Protection Agency scientists have witnessed political interference in their work during the past 5 years. The Union of Concerned Scientists says nearly 1,600 scientists responded to its voluntary questionnaire. The scientists complained of seeing data selectively used to justify agency rulings and political appointees forcing the exclusion or altering of scientific findings. House Oversight Committee Chair Henry Waxman says he plans to question top EPA officials next month. And the CIA has acknowledged it holds more than 7,000 documents dealing with its secret prison and interrogation program. At least 19 have been withheld from disclosure because the White House has claimed presidential communications privilege. In one of the documents, CIA officials request support from the Justice Department after concluding the potential for investigations into its interrogation practices is, quote, virtually inevitable. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and